Hello, and welcome to our AP European History lesson on the revolutions and independence movements of the 1820s and 1830s. In this video, we'll take a look very briefly at several key events like the July Revolution in France, the Greek struggle for independence, the Decembrist revolt in Russia, the birth of Belgium independence, and a bunch of failed nationalist uprisings like Poland, Italy, and the Balkans. But first, let's look at what causes these different revolutions and revolts. Basically, the ideas that were put in place during the French Revolution, they're going to spread really far and wide. And the concert system of Europe that aimed to preserve those monarchies and suppress revolutions is going to try to do just that. But as more of those French Revolution ideas are resonating with the middle and lower classes, we see a shift in thinking. And all of that culminates in these different independence movements. So let's go ahead and get started with the Greek Revolution. The Greek Revolution will begin in 1821 against the Ottoman Empire. Now, Greece had been under Ottoman rule for centuries, but the Greek Orthodox Church really helped spark the rise in what's called Hellenism, which essentially is a Greek national identity. And the Greeks initially succeed in taking back a lot of territory, but Ottoman reinforcements, including Egyptian troops, are going to reverse a lot of their early gains. But Western Europeans, they love to fight the Ottomans, and they're going to come and help out the Greeks in their revolution and eventually defeat the Ottomans and the Egyptians. There was a lot of coverage of these events. Even the famous poet Lord Byron joined the Greek cause, and he became a martyr for their independence movement. Okay, moving on to Russia. In Russia, liberal ideas entered through the military elite who had fought in Europe during the Napoleonic Wars. And when Tsar Alexander I dies in 1825, there's this big succession crisis that occurs. His brother, Nicholas, is the named heir, but many people actually are going to favor Constantine, who had married a commoner and was kind of ineligible to get the throne because he's married to a commoner. So, because Nicholas is the named heir, he tries to get the Russian troops to take an oath of allegiance to him, even though he is known as less popular than Constantine. And basically, what happens is that there's a lot of people that say no. They refuse to swear loyalty to him. And they gather in the Senate Square demanding a constitutional monarchy. And the revolt was quickly crushed, with 5 leaders executed and many others exiled to Siberia. Even though it failed and it was squashed pretty quickly, the Decembrist revolt marks a big stage in Russia, like progress for Russia, because it marks the first political uprising in Russian history with very clear goals, and not just clear goals, but clear liberal goals. And Tsar Nicholas responds to this with repression, censorship, a secret police force, and even stricter control because he's afraid that they're going to kind of influence those policies into Russia. And so it becomes a real turning point in Russia as an autocracy. Now, this will bring us to France, which I know you're thinking France again, but yeah, they're back. So we start off with what's called the Restoration era in France, where France has just come out of its chaos of revolution and Napoleon. And Louis XVIII is going to govern France as a constitutional monarch. And he puts in place the 1814 charter that still has all of those great kind of liberal ideas in there. It limits its royal power, it grants legislative power, protects rights, upholds Napoleon's code. But there's a lot of tension in France right now between the moderate reformers and these people called the ultra royalists who want to turn back the clock and basically make France just like it was before. And the leader of that movement is Count Artois. And so we see royalist mobs in 1815 attack former revolutionaries. We see in the 1816 elections, the ultras were rejected in favor of more moderate royalists instead. So in 1820, the son of Artois, he is murdered. And royalists are going to blame those revolutionary leftists. And Louis XVIII is going to believe them. He's going to start to move the government more to the right because he feels like those people are safer. So he changes laws in like the electoral laws that narrow the eligible voters so less people can vote. He instills more censorship. And a lot of liberals were driven out of legal political life and into kind of illegal activities within the state. And this is where things leave off when he dies in 1824. Next in line for the throne is his brother Charles X of France. And so his goals are basically to make France an absolute monarchy again. He's trying to lessen the influence of the middle class, limit the right to vote, put clergy back in charge of education. He wants to promote the aristocracy and do things that work well for him. He's trying to control the press. Like he's doing all the things that they didn't like before the French Revolution. And then in his July ordinances, he tries to dissolve the entire parliament. And he does that because in the 1830 election, it brings another Liberal Party majority. And he doesn't want that. He's like, nope, I'm in charge. I don't need any of you people here. I'm going to have strict censorship and change the voting laws so that fewer people can actually vote. And this won't happen again. And what follows is called the July Revolution. Workers, students, and the middle class, they revolt, and Charles flees. And then this guy named Louis Philippe, the citizen king, is installed. And he's supposed to be there to represent the more moderate bourgeois monarchy and promises to rule by the will of the people.
Which, by the way, if you're wondering, if you've ever seen Les Miserables by Victor Hugo, that is what this time period is all about. Anyways, so Louis Philippe, the Citizen King. So he tries to reduce property qualifications to make more people eligible to vote, and he gets all those like censorships against the press removed. He puts the flag back. He does a lot of things that like people really like.
But the big problem is that they're basically going to ignore the needs and demands of the workers in the cities. And that's going to be really bad for his regime because, he had all these people that you know, revolted for him and his movement, and then he doesn't do anything to help them. So the life of the average person in France is still really not good. Okay, now we're done with France for a while. Let's move on to Belgium. Belgium was also inspired by France, and the Belgians rose up against the Dutch rule in 1830. Now, the Congress of Vienna had lumped Belgium in with the Netherlands, but cultural differences like language, religion, and economy made that union unstable. So, this is one of those examples we see of nationalism rising in these places and making that influential to the movement. So, after protests broke out, Belgium declares independence, and surprisingly, the major European powers all stay out of it, with the exception of France. France is on the side of Belgium and helps them secure their freedom without a full scale war, which then takes us over to Poland. Now, Poland is going to see probably the bloodiest fighting of all the 1830 revolutions. And although the Congress of Vienna had granted Poland some autonomy within the Russian Empire as part of their deal there, it steadily was eroded over time. And after rumors that the Polish troops might be used to suppress uprisings in France and Belgium, a rebellion broke out. Now, unfortunately for this movement, Poland was not united in this revolt, and they might have been successful if they were, but the revolutionaries are split into two groups, the moderates and the radicals. And because they had such different visions, they could not work together to receive foreign support. Like governments wouldn't back them because they're like, we don't know what you stand for. So the Russian army eventually crushes this uprising, but the Polish fight inspires more future kind of nationalist movements, which then takes us over to Italy. This one's pretty short. I mean, they weren't successful. Italian revolutionaries in places like Modena and Parma also attempted to break free, inspired by the French Revolution. But in Austria, under Metternich's control, they quickly sent troops to put down those revolts. And once again, the broader European powers decided they basically just didn't want to intervene. And the dream of Italian unification had to wait for the next generation. Now let's look at the Balkans. The Balkans also has regions that are starting to push for independence from the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire was already very weak from wars with Russia during this time period, and they're beginning to lose control. They're getting ready to be the sick man of Europe. And these early uprisings are going to foreshadow the Balkan crisis that would dominate European politics later on in the 19th century. And then lastly, just a brief little blurb about the Latin American revolutions happening in South America. Across the Atlantic, independence movements had already erupted, before this. Between 1810 and 1830, most of Latin America breaks free from Spanish and Portuguese control. They're also inspired by Enlightenment ideas and the success of the American and French revolutions. There's figures there like Bolivar and San Martin that lead the charge towards national self-determination. So, after all of that, what do we take away from this? Well, the concert of Europe provided for a recovery period for Europe after all those long years of revolution and Napoleon. So it got shaken up a little, but it wasn't destroyed. Many liberal and nationalist movements were crushed, especially in Eastern and Central Europe, which is kind of what they had wanted with the consort system. But in Western Europe, we see some revolutions succeed, especially where they had strong middle class support. These movements planted seeds of nationalism, but they often will leave the working class behind. And the revolutions of the 1820s and 30s were just the beginning, not the end, of a century of kind of upheaval and change. Whew, okay. Thanks for hanging in there with me as we go through all these different examples of revolutions in the 1820s and 30s. Thanks for watching.